A Yom Tov, and welcome to our third session of Minutes of Midrash. And this session is brought to us by Captain America. I choose Captain America because one has to ask the question, what is the reward for righteousness? Right? Captain America is a guy who always strives to do the right thing in the right circumstances. It's never easy. And oftentimes it's painful. We know if we watch the Marvel Cinematic Universe that Captain America's life is not easy. Righteousness does not automatically make for a simple life. And so what we're going to be looking at is a Midrash that tries to address that question. The Midrash that we're going to be focusing on this session is called Pesikta, it looks a little washed out there, Pesikta de Rav Kahana. And Pesikta de Rav Kahana is different from either of the Midrashim that we looked at before, all right? Whereas Tanhuma was an anthology of Midrashim on all 5 books of the Bible, and Mechilta de Rabbi Ishmael was devoted to a single book, to the book of Exodus. Pesikta de Rav Kahana is actually designed to follow the calendar. These are midrashim devoted to the different holidays that come up. So Pesikta means a section or chapter, and Rabbi Kahana, another Talmudic rabbi, is identified as the titular author, but he's not. Again, these are all anthologies created by many different voices within Jewish tradition, and you can see oftentimes that opinions contradict each other, that you'll read one interpretation and then it will be followed immediately by another interpretation that goes in a different direction. And that's actually the point of what we're going to be talking about as we talk about what is the reward of righteousness. All right, and this one, in a very, very vivid way, the little passage I've chosen is going to show us how rabbis disagree, and that's okay. But at the end, it builds towards a very certain kind of idea. Now, this particular version is the English version. I have the Hebrew version at home, but it's always good to have, it's hard to slog through and find exactly what you want in the Hebrew. You zero in on English, you can then read the entire Hebrew and see what's wrong with the translation. Not that there's much wrong with this translation, because this is done by William Brode. William Brode is a Reform rabbi who's produced a half dozen excellent translations of Midrashic books. Remember, as always, Midrash is a genre, a collection of books, as well as a style of teaching and reading the Torah. And it reads the Bible, reads the Torah by atomizing ideas and focusing on and dissecting a single verse, a single word, or a single letter. And it also is intertextual. We learned that from our second section, is that what it does is it draws together diverse passages from diverse books of the Bible and weaves them together. And so even though the Bible is in fact a library of different writings by different authors with different interpretations of Israelite and Jewish identity, the rabbis pull it all together for us and both reassure us that it's okay to disagree, but ultimately reassure us that in fact all of these ideas take us to the same location, all right? That it brings us into the presence of God. That ilu ve'ilu, devarim Elohim chayim, that this opinion and that opinion can both simultaneously be the words of the living God, that we can learn divine lessons from our disagreements. All right, so let's pull up Pesikta de Rav Kahana, And there we go. All right. Now we are in Piska, that is section or chapter 25. And this section is actually preliminary midrashim leading up to the high holy days, to the days of awe. You can see that the subtitle on there is Slichot, meaning that in the 30 days before the beginning of Rosh Hashanah, traditional Jews would gather together on a morning basis and recite a short liturgy called Slichot, prayers of forgiveness. So we get in the mood for forgiveness before we get to actually confessing our shortcomings in doing this. All right. So not surprisingly, the theme here is righteousness, because that's what we want. We want to enter the gates of righteousness. It's part of the phrasing of the high holidays. Open the doors of righteousness to me that I may enter. So let's start with our first verse, which is from the book of Job. Yet the righteous holds fast to his way, and he that hath clean hands enhances strength. All right. So in its context, it's Job talking about what is required of a righteous person. They have to be steadfast and consistent in their actions. They don't fall sway to fashion or peer pressure. And he that has clean hands, which is a biblical idiom for someone who conducts themselves, the alternate one is one we're familiar with. He has blood on his hands, which is a vivid, hyperbolic, biblical way of saying he's not a good person. He that holds fast to his way, he has integrity, and he is consistently acting righteously, enhances strength. Now, again, in context, it probably means the righteous person grows stronger. All right. So Job would tell us that the reward of being righteousness is going from strength to strength, as we like to say in Hebrew. Of course, the book of Job undermines that idea. Job in his righteousness suffers and does not go from strength to strength. In fact, he falls into a pit of tragedy and misery and weakness and illness. So perhaps this verse is not saying exactly what we think it's saying in its context. All right. Here's the initial bold move made here. The righteous is the Holy One, of whom it is said, the Lord is righteous, he loves righteousness. And that has clean hands is also the Holy One, to whom it is said, thou art of eyes too clean to behold evil, Habakkuk. And he enhances strength, is again the Holy One, who enhances the strength of the righteous to enable them to do his will. All right. So look what the author is doing. He's saying that even though we think that the righteous is referring to us, to a good person, it's actually a verse that the subject of it is God. And they're actually using the Hebrew in an interesting way, because the phrase "a righteous one," the righteous can mean the righteous one, meaning a righteous individual as well as a group, and they're playing on that. So the righteous one is actually God being referred to in the sentence. And they provide a quote that proves it, right? Intertextuality. The Lord is righteous. He loves righteousness. Therefore, this verse must be about God. But clean hands, can we talk about God having clean hands? That's a little ridiculous. Isn't God innately good? Yet it also says, and he that has clean hands is also the Holy One, to whom it is said, thou are, or you that eyes are, thou art of eyes too clean to behold evil. All right, what's happening here? Well, first of all, the unstated connection here is that both hands and eyes are human attributes that are ascribed to God in different parts of the Bible. In fact, there's never any place that talks about God having clean anything except this one verse. But they found this one verse, and it talks about God's eyes being so clean that the evil can't look upon it. The God's eyes cannot look upon evil. So then they want you to make the leap. Well, if God has clean eyes, God also has clean hands. Therefore, that second part of the verse is also referring to God. So what is it that this verse is telling us about God? Finally, that he enhances strength is again the Holy One who enhances the strength of the righteous to enable them to do his will. So there's the reward of being a righteous person according to this first opinion. And that is that God strengthens the righteous in order to continue to do what needs to be done. Okay, that's the reward. Now, that's not the reward that you might seek under other circumstances or under religious traditions. You know, both Christianity and Islam are salvific traditions. They promise you a kind of salvation that you can't have outside of their religious faith. And that's normally expressed in terms of being able to go to heaven rather than to hell. But the idea is that God will save us and that righteousness is the tool by which we achieve salvation. Not so here. Judaism is not a salvific tradition. It doesn't say that you have to be a certain way in order to enjoy some kind of world to come. You can enhance your world to come by behaving better, and we'll see that. But ultimately, that's not what's at stake. What's at stake is that you become a better servant of God by being righteous. That's a little disappointing compared to a heaven with 72 beautiful young women, or whatever it is that Christians enjoy about the divine concert that goes on, but it's maybe a little more realistic. All right, now we're going to get an alternative opinion on this, that this verse does not refer to God, but rather refers to someone we know. And this is something else the Midrash likes to do, and that is, when you think you're referring about someone in general or someone anonymously, the Midrash likes to decide it's actually referring to a specific individual. And here you'll see them do that. This is the second opinion. Another comment, the righteous holds fast to his way, applies to Moses. We're not talking about God here. We're talking about Moses specifically. How do we know that? Well, I'm going to bring my proof text to prove that too. Of whom it is said, he persisted in executing the righteousness of the Lord and his ordinances with Israel. So Moses is the conveyor of God's righteousness, and therefore this verse refers to him. And he that has clean hands also applies to Moses, of whom who was able to say to the people, I have not taken one ass from them. Not a felicitous phrase in modern context. You might be chuckling, and if you weren't, you're now chuckling because I brought it up. But in any case, the point being that that Moses has conducted himself vis-a-vis the Israelites with absolute integrity. He's not taken bribes. He's not taken undue recompense. Therefore, he has clean hands. All right, that is the inferred part. It's a little more of a stretch in terms of a proof text, but it works. He enhances strength also applies to Moses, who enhanced the strength of the Almighty, as when he said, and now I pray thee, let the strength of the Lord be enhanced. Numbers. Wait, what? This was making perfect sense up until we got to the end of this, right? The earlier guy said, God strengthens the righteous that they may do God's will. But now it's saying that what Moses does is his righteousness actually enhances the strength of God. That's pretty radical. God needs Moses. That's what he's saying. God's not strong enough by himself. but needs the help of the righteous. Pretty shocking. But he offers a proof text, and his proof text is when Moses prays, and now I pray thee, let the strength of the Lord be enhanced. All right, so God's not strong enough, and therefore Moses has to pray for him to be stronger. But it does serve as kind of a proof text of this particular issue. But of course, that may not be what was originally intended. That's kind of what we would call a strong reading of that God needs to be strengthened, and Moses is the man to do it. That's pretty wild. Okay, so we've got two different interpretations, each one of them taking a radical rereading of this verse. One of them saying that it's referring to God and not people, and other one saying it refers to Moses, but it implies that God needs our help. All right, now we get the opinion of a whole bunch of rabbis. This is footnoting in the rabbinic tradition. Thereby, as Rabbi Jacob bar Acha citing Rabbi Yossi bar Rabbi Hanina, and the rabbis citing Rabbi Yochanan taught, in other words, there's a whole series of people who believe what follows. Moses meant, may the strength of thy mercy be enhanced, so the measure of mercy prevail over the measure of justice. And now I pray thee, let the strength of the Lord be enhanced to this end. In other words, these rabbis understand the verse probably in the way it was originally intended, which is God, will you forefront this aspect of your strength versus another aspect? And in fact, what is being cited here is Moses asking for God to forgive the Israelites. Okay, so in context, what it means is, God, you are a God of justice and a God of mercy. Please, in this particular case, draw upon your mercy, not your justice, because if it were justice, we'd all deserve whatever terrible end you're thinking about. Instead, I want you, the strength of the Lord, to be enhanced towards mercy. That really is the contextual reading. That's correct. All these rabbis pretty much have the Bible down correctly on this particular one. But, I mean, never settle for what the Bible originally intended. Even though that's context, Midrash doesn't care about context that much. All right, but we're going to go into a different mode here in just a minute. And that is the next paragraph adopts a parable to illustrate the point that all these rabbis are making. So parables are pretty common in the Midrash. And what is a parable? Well, we all sort of have a sense of it. We use a number of terms almost interchangeably: parable, fable, allegory. All right, but I'm going to describe a parable in a certain way, and then I'm going to show you that this is mostly what Jewish parables do. A parable, might as well stop looking at this for a moment. You can see me. A parable is a streamlined narrative that is taking an indirect route to an idea. It's streamlined because it makes it easier to understand. It gives you a visual association with an abstract idea, and so that's great, but it's indirect in that it's not talking about what it seems to be talking about. So if you're reading a parable about a king and his wife and their marriage contract, that parable is not about a king, his wife, and a marriage contract, the direct and obvious point. It's about something else. And the something else is you have to figure out what are known as the tenors, the associative logic of the characters. So what it's really about, the parable is really about God, who is the king, the wife, who is the people Israel, and the Torah, which is the marriage contract. That's a parable. All right. So it's meant to be a simplifying narrative that is parabolic. It comes at the point indirectly. All right. So now we're going, let me take a moment further to talk about the standard structure of a midrashic parable. There are many examples of parables that violate these three rules in one way or another. The book I published on Sefer HaBahir is full of about 40 parables that break the rules. But as a general rule, you can use this outline to understand every parable. The parable begins with, this is a parable. It tells you that this is not a real story. It's not about some events that really happened. Sometimes it will be, this can be compared to. This can be compared to a king of flesh and blood, or this can be compared to a beggar. So right off, the parable tells you that you're dealing with a story that is not factual. All right. And then it will go on and give you the parable, the various figures interacting with each other. And that's called the mashal. And then at the end, you have what's called the nimshal. The nimshal is the summary intent of the parable. The problem with very streamlined parables is that you could draw multiple conclusions from such a simple story. It isn't always obvious what the conclusion is. Therefore, the teller of the parable wants to make sure you understand the point that he's trying to make, or she. So the nimshal keeps you on track and not to get distracted thinking it's talking about something else, though it could be. And in fact, parables have been reused to make different points, but that's part of the utility of it. All right, so let's go back and meet our parable. Back to screen share. All right, there we are. All right, so now we're going to talk with Rabbi Yudin. Rabbi Yudin told a parable of a strong man who was exercising with a block of stone that came from a stone cutter. All right, so there's a powerful man, a strong man. All right, a passerby saw him and said, "Your strength is marvelous. May your strength be enhanced by your exercise, as the strength of the Almighty One's mercy is enhanced by his exercise of it." And there's our nimshal right there. All right, so the mashal only consists of the passerby saying, well, your strength is marvelous. May your strength be enhanced. All right, so in our parable, we are told it's a parable. First point. So we're not talking about Arnold Schwarzenegger or any historic character, any Hollywood actor that appeared in a Hercules movie or anything like that. They're just talking about a generic strongman in a kind of exemplary story. All right, he's exercising with a block of stone from a stone cutter. He's very strong. A passerby sees him and says, "Wow, you're pretty strong. May your strength be enhanced by what you're doing. May you continue to go from strength to strength." All right, and then the nimshal is built right in as the strength of the Mighty One's mercy is enhanced by his exercise of it. So basically what Moses is saying when he says, "May your strength be enhanced," is he's saying, I hope you exercise this divine capacity as much as possible. All right. And so the parable also comes to reinforce the message from the rabbis who insisted that it's just referring not to the idea that either the righteous need to be enhanced or the God needs to be enhanced, but that God has different aspects and we ask certain of them to be manifest at certain moments. All right. Then it concludes, on the other hand, now that we've heard from the rabbi who talks about the verses referring to God and the alternate opinion that the rabbi is talking about, this verse refers to Moses, and the sub-opinion of the multiple rabbis who say, don't get any crazy ideas from this passage. It just means that you want God to exercise certain divine strengths. It then goes on and adds, on the other hand, when men do not do his will, then, if one dare to say such a thing, the rock that begot thee, thou dost weaken. Deuteronomy. What just happened there? All right. At the very end, someone pipes in to support the interpretation of the second rabbi who said, well, it's all about Moses, but Moses actually strengthens God. It is the righteous empower and strengthen God. And his proof for that is something said in the reverse. All right. The rock that beget thee, that be God, thou hast weakened. We have the capacity as human beings to weaken God. Therefore, we must have the capacity to strengthen God. All right. Oh my gosh, what just happened here? And of course, it's a daring thing to say, so it includes the little statement, if one dares say such a thing, which I'm about to do, I dare to do that. But he's sort of giving a little disclaimer. This is so ridiculous, one couldn't imagine saying it, and yet I'm going to say it. God needs us. That's the essential message. God needs us. So what is the reward of the righteous? Come back on the screen. What is the reward of the righteous? Ultimately, according to the end of this particular Midrash, it is that we get to participate with God in making the world better. That we need God, but God needs us. Now, we have been exposed to centuries, millennia of Greek philosophical thought, Western philosophical thought, that ultimately defines the idea that God can't truly be God unless God is absolutely perfect. But the outcome of that thinking is that God doesn't need anything. So the whole universe becomes accidental in a sense. If God is entirely self-sufficient and needs nothing, why did he bother to create this world? And that presents a mystery or a conundrum. The rabbis make a different move. They don't accept the idea that God is absolutely perfect and doesn't need anything from his creation. As I like to say in modern idiom, God is the supreme being, but he's not the perfect being. And the Midrash argues that, in fact, the creation exists because God needs it to. God needs our support in a project, and the project is perfecting the world. And therefore, the righteous help God out. And by reverse, if we are unrighteous, we not only hurt ourselves and hurt the world around us, but we hurt God, as it were, as if one could say such a thing. So the rabbis know that they're making a very, very radical claim here, but they want us to understand that what we do is of ultimate importance. The choices we make matter on all levels. And the reward of being righteous is to be a friend of God, a co-worker of God, someone who participates in divine things. We get to have the godly or godlike experience by being righteous. And God not only appreciates this, God needs it. Very daring, but that's the Midrash. And so I'll let you ponder that one and think about it. And I look forward to talking to you about the next one. That's a very deep one. That's a very deep one. I'll maybe show you something not so theologically challenging next time we look. Take care, everybody, and we'll talk again soon.